Hi guys, welcome back. We are here to continue A Timeless Christmas by Alexis Stanton. Again, now a Hallmark movie. So I'm excited to see that as soon as we are done reading the book. We left off on, I believe it was chapter 8. Yes. Okay. Wearing her Rosie costume, Megan escorted visitors into Charles's study. She smoothed her hands down her apron, trying to calm her nerves. This was Charles's first official appearance as Charles Whitley. Would he be successful at it when he had to perform it as a role, or would he crumple? Not everyone was cut out to be a reenactor, which she'd seen before with other staff members who quickly flamed out. After Megan had rehearsed with Charles, it was finally time to put him to the test. "Right this way, everyone," she said. "I'm sure Mr. Whitley won't mind if we have a look in his study." "I should say I do mind," Charles exclaimed from behind his desk. "Oh, Mr. Whitley," Megan said, feigning surprise. "I didn't realize you were in here." He stood. "What do you mean by bringing all these dressed strangers into my private study, Rosie?" "They're only here to admire your lovely home. Isn't that right, friends?" "They're only here to admire your lovely home. Isn't that right, friends?" She turned to the guests who were smiling broadly and filming the interaction on their phones. Some people nodded at her prompting look. "If you rapscallions do not vacate my premises immediately," Charles said hotly, "I shall summon the police. See if I don't." "It's Christmas, Mr. Whitley," Megan beseeched. "No one wants to be taken in by the police so close to the holiday." "Very well," he grumbled. "You may look about, but keep it brief." He walked around the desk and leaned against it, his arms folded across his chest. Megan pointed out the noteworthy aspects of the study as she had before, but soon she turned to Charles. "Might I impose upon you to answer a few of our guests' questions?" "Very well," he said in a reluctant voice. For a moment, the visitors were silent, likely a bit intimidated by the commanding presence of Mr. Whitley. Finally, one girl wearing glasses nervously raised her hand. "Yes, miss?" Charles asked, his voice much more friendly. "Where do you get your ideas from?" she asked. Charles rubbed a hand along his jaw. "A very good question. I wish I could say I have a reliable source of inspiration, but it's nearly impossible for me to predict what will make my mind start turning. Sometimes it's the way the light hits a piece of metal. Other times I'll see someone struggling to complete a task and will think about how I can make their work easier or faster. It's quite variable." Girl in glasses nodded. "Thanks." "Of course," he answered, his tone sincere and kind. Megan warmed to see how he treated the girl, putting her at ease and speaking to her with respect. His answer had been detailed and thoughtful, too, and not a bit dismissive. A man with a cane raised his hand. "Yes, sir?" Charles asked. "How long does it take you to create a new invention?" "Another excellent question." Charles's forehead wrinkled in thought. "It can take anywhere from a week to a year, depending on the length of time I need to formulate the concept, create prototypes, test the prototypes, and then apply for a patent. At any given time, I'm working on several concepts at once, all of them at different stages of development, so it's a challenge to keep everything straight." "That's where I come in," Megan said. "I keep the house running and ensure that Mr. Whitley is organized. Without me reminding him, he wouldn't eat and would skip sleep entirely." "Yes, Rosie, you are indispensable," Charles said grudgingly after rolling his eyes. "How would I ever remember which shoe goes on which foot?" "You wouldn't if I didn't write left and right on them." The guests chuckled and a little firework display of happiness popped and fizzed in Megan's chest. Most of this back and forth with Charles was pure improvisation, and it felt so good to have someone with whom she could be so in tune. She and Charles played naturally off of each other. She caught herself looking at Charles a bit too long and reminded herself that he was only here for a short while. He was determined to return to 1902 and Eliza. But he's here now, so let's make it good for him. A tall man in a sweatshirt with the football team's logo on it spoke. "Aren't you less significant than Henry Ford?" Megan frowned at the man's rude question. "Had I not disappeared," Charles said in an even and measured tone, "I surely would have invented the moving assembly line long before Ford did. "But you were only doing your thing for a decade," the man pressed. "Ford was around for half a century." "Precisely," Charles said. "I did much more in a short amount of time than Ford accomplished in 50 years. Besides, it's the quality of how one spends one's time rather than the length of time you're given." "I think we've imposed on Mr. Whitley long enough," Megan said, eager to keep the interactions pleasant. We'll continue our tour. When the last visitor left the study, Megan smiled and gave him a thumbs up. He returned the gesture, his own smile wide and genuine. The same pattern repeated for the second tour, with Charles acting grumpy upon their entrance, but then being very patient and kind with the visitors when they asked questions. He was especially gentle with the children. Again, Megan and Charles bantered to the delight of the guest and Megan herself. It felt right and natural to be with him like this, and she could hardly believe that she and Charles hadn't been doing this together forever. When the final guest left the mansion at 5 o'clock, Megan went into the break room and found Charles poring over a newspaper. He looked up as she entered and gave her a wave. "How did your first day playing Charles Whitley go?" she asked. "Marvelously. Well, I think," he answered. "The visitors certainly kept me on my toes." "But you were very good with them. Curiosity should always be encouraged." Megan nodded, no doubt. Amber strolled into the break room, still wearing her costume. She walked to the cabinet to grab a mug. "The guests kept telling me how great Mr. Whitley was," she said with a wink. "They were getting angry with me for marrying Morin." Charles grumbled under his breath. "I think you're a hit," Amber said quickly in a clear effort to change the topic from Harold Morin. "That's very kind," Charles said. Megan pulled the book of audition monologues from her cubby and brought it to Amber. "I think you dropped this earlier." A blush spread across Amber's cheeks as she quickly took the book. "Thanks." Setting down the mug, she hurried to her own cubby and stuffed the book into her bag. "Are you planning on auditioning for anything?" Megan asked. Well... Amber fidgeted with the lace on her cup. "There's an original play going up on Broadway this season. The playwright won a Tony a couple of years ago. Everyone in the New York acting scene wants a part. People are supposed to send in their audition videos by December 23rd. How exciting," Charles said. "Are you going to do it?" Amber's eyes flicked downward. "Not sure." "Why not?" Megan wondered. "It's just..." Amber shrugged. "It's a really big deal, and maybe I'm not good enough. I just do regional theater, not big Broadway productions. The best of the best are trying out for roles." "Amber," Megan said, setting her hand on her friend's arm, "I've seen you act ever since we were in the middle school production of Alice in Wonderland. You stole the show as the Queen of Hearts. You should go for it." "Maybe, I don't know." Amber glanced away again. "I have to go. The show starts in a little bit and I need to grab a quick dinner before my call time." Before Megan could press the issue any further, Amber took her bag and walked quickly from the room. Megan exhaled. "I really want this for Amber, but it's tough to get her to see how much she deserves it." "If she's ambitious," Charles said, "then she needs to take the risk." A wave of nervousness came over Megan. He'd come from humble origins and he toiled hard to elevate himself. But how would he feel about the bag of second-hand clothes she'd gotten for him? He kept insisting on paying her back for his groceries and phone, but maybe borrowed clothing would be too much for him to accept. Charles definitely had pride and wasn't the sort of person who easily accepted a handout. "I, have something for you." "Oh?" She went to the cubby that served as her locker and retrieved a large shopping bag, then walked the bag over to him. "Payday's not for weeks," she said, "and I thought you might need some other clothing and a warm coat." He peered inside and pulled out a pair of jeans. Denim trousers. We wore these in the steel mill. Everybody wears them now, and they last a long time. He pulled out a few sweaters, shirts, and a coat, which he arranged on the dining table. They were an array of handsome, deep colors that would suit Charles perfectly. "I called my mom, and she brought by some of my brother's stuff," Megan said. "You're around the same size as Nate." "Won't he miss all this?" "Nathan? He's a clothes horse, and every time he comes for a visit, he leaves stuff behind. So I thought..." She shrugged and looked at him uncertainly. "I hope you don't mind." Charles made a small, thoughtful sound. "When I made my first $1,000, I commissioned a wardrobe from Manhattan's finest tailors and haberdashers. I never thought I'd be in a place in my life where I'd rely on cast-off garments again." "It's just a loan," she said, "except for the socks and underwear. That's all new. You'll get the rest back when you have enough to buy your own clothes." "Of course I will," he said at once. He held up a navy sweater to his shoulders. "This should suit me well enough, thank you." "Sure, and maybe you could wear your warmest stuff for our outing tonight." "What is tonight?" "The town tree lighting ceremony. Before you say no," she said hastily, seeing he was about to do just that. "Remember what we talked about earlier? How you might be able to use this time to experience life more? Well, now's your chance." He still looked doubtful. "I don't know." "Come on." She playfully tugged on his sleeve. It's just a few minutes, and if you hate it, I'll take you right back home again. Don't forget, I'm your Christmas guide. I promise you'll have fun. She wasn't certain why it was so important to her that Charles finally experienced the magic of the season, but she thought of him returning to 1902 without seeing how wonderful Christmas could be made her heart heavy. His life had been one of work and ambition, but hardly any feeling. She wanted to give him a bit of Christmas cheer. All right, he said after a moment, but before we go, I need to spend some time researching my disappearance. I feel certain that there must be a clue in there as to what caused me to travel through time. If I know that, then perhaps I'll be able to reproduce the conditions and return home. He scowled. The very idea that Morin took my life makes my blood boil. I must prevent his appropriation of my home and my fiancé from happening. Right, of course. Disappointment flattened her eagerness, but naturally Charles would want to go back to his own time and back to Eliza. Maybe I could help. Are you certain? It might be rather dull work. She laughed. I'm an academic, remember? Dull work is exciting to me. A corner of his mouth turned up. Excellent. Shall we reconnoiter in my study in 30 minutes? Sounds good. That'll give us time to change out clothes, and when we're done with our investigation, I'll drive us to Cutter Springs Park for the tree lighting. I'm looking forward to it, I think. Back in her daily clothes, Megan strode into the study, then stopped abruptly. Charles stood by one of the bookcases, a book in his hands. He changed into the modern clothing she'd lent him. He wore a dark gray sweater and slim-cut jeans. With his well-trimmed beard, he looked as though he could have stepped from the pages of an upscale catalog. Wow! He glanced up from the book, a small line appearing between his eyebrows as he frowned. Is something wrong? No, everything's great. She shook her head, trying to clear it. Where do we start? Holding up the book in his hands, he said, I'm looking into other accounts of time travel. There are several volumes in my library that address the issue. This one has Washington Irving's story, Rip Van Winkle. He nodded toward his desk where a small stack of books perched on the edge. You'll find other texts that address traveling through time. Megan went to the desk and grabbed the book on top of the stack. She read the spine. A Christmas Carol? Seasonally appropriate. Did you see or talk to any ghost of Christmas future before you jump forward in time? Not that I'm aware of. I think you probably noticed something like that. Tall guy, black hooded cloak, doesn't say much. She glanced at him. We could probably rule that theory out. Charles nodded, then returned his book to the shelf. Nor did I fall asleep after meeting mysterious men playing ninepins. He walked to the desk and plucked the next book from the pile. There are still other avenues to explore. Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Before you time traveled, did you get a blow to the head? That's what happens to Hank Morgan in the book. I did not, and in the Yankees case, he traveled back in time. So we can probably rule that out. There's H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, but I didn't invent a massive contraption to speed me to 800,000 years into the future. He made a small grunt of irritation. Blast! I thought there might be a clue in some of these stories. She moved to the bookcase and patted a few of the volumes shelved there. Much as I love books and a good library, there's a lot more information online. Another frown pleated his forehead. Online? As in a telephone line? Sort of, she exhaled. The internet is basically a telecommunications network that connects people all over the world. Important information is stored there, and a lot of stuff that's a huge waste of time. She thought of the hours she'd spent watching videos of cats playing and recipes for the world's best chocolate chip cookie. How do I find it? She quickly discarded the idea of using her phone, since it was small and not every website was designed to be seen on mobile devices. There's a computer in Philip's office. I don't think he'd mind if we used it. We should find some good info with a few quick searches. By all means, let us go. Charles waved her forward, and she saw in the eagerness of his gesture how important he was to get answers. Her heart sank, but she couldn't be saddened that he wanted to go home. At least she told herself not to be sad. But even in the short amount of time she'd been in Charles's company, she'd grown attached. Megan led him down the hallway past the rooms open to the public before heading down a smaller corridor that, in its day, had been used by servants. She opened the door marked Philip Tran, director, flipped on the light, then went quickly to the desk and turned on the laptop sitting atop it. I'm the furthest thing from a computer expert, she exclaimed as Charles stood beside her. If you want to know how the internet works, you'd be better off going to the university and talking to one of the IT professors. Charles stared with fascination at the screen before blinking his eyes. Much as I would love dismantling this device and learning how it functions, I'm more interested right now in what it has to tell us. I think Philip would be a little miffed if you took his computer apart too. She opened Google and typed time travel into the search box. A second later, hundreds of thousands of hits appeared. Yikes! We've got a ton of stuff to sift through here. Let's try to narrow it down. Perhaps other people disappeared the same day I did, Charles suggested. Perhaps they too traveled into the future. We can search for commonalities. Fortunately, being an academic has given me a black belt in online research. Charles glanced at her wrist. What does the color of your belt have to do with conducting research? She fought to keep from smiling. It's a ranking system for people who practice Asian martial arts. I was just being metaphorical. She held up a hand. Don't worry, Charles, I've got this. Yet, after a solid hour of research, they were no closer to their goal than they'd been earlier. They had tried examining accounts of disappearances, different geographical locations in their proximity to unexplained events, even folk tales of portals to fairy kingdoms. Nothing yielded results. As Megan typed, Charles paced back and forth in the small office. The longer they searched, the quicker he moved, until he looked like a pinball ricocheting from one wall to the other. We're not getting anywhere, she finally admitted. I'm sorry. The look of frustration on his face made her stomach clench. Even so, he said, we made an attempt. This foray wasn't successful, but I'm not quitting. Maybe a tree lighting ceremony might cheer you up, she said. His expression shifted to one of doubt. I'm not certain how. Just give it a shot, she said. You're a man of science. You know how important it is to conduct experiments. Even those that don't yield the desired results still mean something. After a moment, he nodded. All right, show me this mood-altering tree. She shut down the computer and turned out the light before they exited the office. A small gleam of happiness shined within her. Much as she wanted to help Charles, it certainly was nice to have him in her time for a little longer. Bundled into their winter coats, she drove Charles into town and parked a few blocks away from the center of town. Before we go to the tree lighting ceremony, she said as she locked the car, there's something I want to show you. Anticipation nearly made her bounce on her feet like a kid, but she managed to keep it together enough to stay rooted to the ground. She'd also had trouble staying focused after seeing Charles in modern clothing. What is it? He asked. A surprise, but one you'll like, I promise. She wasn't actually certain if he'd like what she had in store for them, but she decided to brazen it out. Come with me. She mounted the stairs to the library, a two-story structure that boasted neo-colonial architecture, complete with columns flanking the entryway. We're going to read? Charles asked. You'll see. They entered the library and were quickly enfolded in the pleasant, cozy hush. Fortunately, the library kept later hours during the holiday season to accommodate kids who were on break from school. A small Christmas tree stood in the entryway, its branches adorned with ornaments that resembled tiny books. Even the angel on top of the tree held a book in her hands. Megan pointed to the mural that decorated the entryway. In a thick, muscular style, the mural depicted workers operating printing presses and distributing books and newspapers to a grateful populace. This is one of the older buildings in town, she said in a quiet voice. It was completed during the era of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, created by President Roosevelt in the 1930s. President Roosevelt was still in office by the 30s? Charles asked in shock. Franklin Roosevelt, Megan said, a distant cousin to Theodore. I see. He looked at the mural thoughtfully. Strange to think that something from the 1930s is considered old. It was decades ahead of me. The fact that all this time travel hasn't made you go off your rocker is amazing, Megan said. A corner of his mouth curved upward. Outside, I appear calm, but inside, I am a fairground carousel turning in circles. He looked back at the mural. Is this what you intended to show me? Nope, follow me. They walked past the tall bookshelves that housed Cutter Springs' collection of books. This had been one of Megan's favorite places as a kid. Heck, it still was one of her favorite places. She'd spent many wonderful hours poring through American history books, learning new details about how people lived in times past. She'd also plowed through the library's romance novels. She never could resist a happily ever after. People worked on computers and others read at tables or in comfy chairs. A few recognized Megan as she moved past and gave her a friendly wave. The children's section had much lower shelves, tables, and chairs, plus playmats spread on the floor so kids could sprawl out as they read. Posters of celebrities encouraging children to read were hung around the kids section. Megan and Charles approached the checkout desk and Mr. Hernandez, the librarian, removed his bifocals and smiled in greeting. On the counter was a tiny evergreen tree decorated just like its big brother in the entryway. "Hi, Mr. Hernandez," Megan said in a friendly but quiet voice. "Hello, Megan." The librarian glanced at Charles, and Megan quickly made introductions, though she made sure not to give Charles his last name since that might make for a peculiar conversation. The two men shook hands. "Are you here for the latest releases?" Mr. Hernandez asked. "We just got a new batch of historical romances that I think you'll love." "Not tonight," she said. "I was wondering if we could go on up." Mr. Hernandez gave her a secretive smile. "Going to show your friend the—" Megan put her finger to her lips. "It's a surprise." "Of course. Head on upstairs. Here's the key." He plucked a key attached to a book-shaped piece of brass and handed it to Megan. "Have fun." "Thank you." "Very nice meeting you," Charles said before he and Megan moved on. She pushed open the door that led to the staircase. "Ready to climb? Lead on." At the top of the stairs was the floor of the library that contained the periodicals and media collection. There were fewer people up here, and those that were didn't look up as she and Charles passed. She went toward a door with a roof access sign. "Almost there," she whispered to Charles as she unlocked the door, revealing a very narrow set of metal stairs. Their feet clanged on the steps as they went up higher, and at the top she unlocked another door before pushing it open. It revealed a tar paper covered expanse, lightly coated with snow, as well as a low railing that ran the perimeter of the roof. "Here we are." She walked out onto the roof with her arms open. Charles emerged to stand behind her. They both looked around, taking in the roofline of Cutter Springs and the lights that shined up from the street. The stars appeared a little dimmer in town than back at the mansion, but they still twinkled overhead. Faintly, sounds of traffic below could be heard, and a few voices as pedestrians passed. "There's the movie theater," Megan said, pointing to the neon marquee. She gestured toward other landmarks, and the pizza parlor and the university's office of continuing education. "A very nice view," Charles said. "Here's the reason why I brought you up here." She put her hands on his shoulders, ignoring the solid way he felt beneath her gloved hands, and gently turned him. She angled his body in just the right way until she was satisfied. "Ta-da! What am I looking at?" "If you look right in this direction," she said, excitement in her voice, "down First Avenue, you can see all the older historical buildings in Cutter Springs dating from around the turn of the century. It's just like looking back into the past." The town hall, clock tower, firehouse, and city offices lined the street, their handsome stone facades decorated for the season like the rest of the town. Had she and Charles been at street level, she could have pointed out the dedication plaques that announced the year the buildings were completed. 1903. "I remember this," he said in a stunned whisper. "I remember all of these structures being built, but construction had stopped for the season. Now you get to see what they look like finished." He walked slowly to the railing and looked out at the scene, an expression of amazement on his face. "This is quite extraordinary. It's almost as if I was back once more." "If you listen closely," she said, coming to stand beside him, "you can hear the clip-clop of horse hooves and the sputtering of motor car engines." A slow smile spread across his face. "I can almost hear it." They stood together for several moments, taking in the scene. It was peaceful and restful, and it wasn't difficult to imagine that she and Charles truly had traveled back in time to a simpler era. "How did you find out about this place?" he asked. "When I was in high school, Mr. Hernandez noticed me always checking out all the books on late 19th and early 20th century history, so he said I should come up and show me where to stand in just the right spot." She breathed out into the cool air. "I used to come here a lot when I was being a moody teen and wanted some space." With a start, she realized that she'd never brought anyone up here before. She hadn't wanted to share this piece of the past with anyone, not even Brandon. The Vantage had been her private getaway, until now. It felt right, though, to share it with Charles. He, more than anyone, would understand and appreciate what it meant to see Cutter Springs through the lens of history. He recognized the significance of past times and how everything in the present moment was built upon the past. Only through knowing what had come before could anybody move forward. "Thank you," he said softly, "for sharing this with me. I'm honored." His simple, sincere words made heat rush up into her cheeks and her heart beat faster. "Glad you like it." "I do, very much." She fought the urge to take his hand, although everything in her yelled that she should. Instead, she stuffed her hands into her pockets and stood beside him, feeling comfortable and happy and pleased that he understood what this all meant to her. Megan said nothing. She just let the moment be. Though she wanted to linger on the roof with Charles, the tree lighting ceremony was happening in just a few minutes, and there was no way she wanted him to miss that. They headed back downstairs and gratefully returned the key to Mr. Hernandez before leaving the library. She and Charles walked to the center of town where many people had gathered. Everyone wore warm coats and hats, their faces glowing in the brisk December air. Megan's pulse skipped to see how festive everything looked and how nice Charles looked in his modern clothing. The tree itself stood in a small park in the very middle of town. The eastern white pine was almost 20 feet tall. It was in a huge planter, preserving the roots until it would be planted in a nearby forest after the new year. "We didn't have this ceremony in my time," Charles said as he and Megan approached the park. "Has the town always used live trees?" "Not always. The idea of planting the town's Christmas tree started back in the hippie 60s. "Hippie? Does that involve baby hippopotami?" She chuckled. "It would be pretty exciting if it did involve huge animals. I'd love to see elephants and rhinos roaming around Cutter Springs. Giraffes acting as traffic signals. And if anybody acts up, Police Officer Lion will roar at them." They laughed together as they entered the park where the ceremony was set to take place. Though Megan had been to quite a few tree lighting ceremonies, she never lost her sense of excitement as the magical hour approached. It was even better to share it with Charles. Much of the town had come out for the event, and a quartet sang carols while some local teens operated a hot cocoa stand, raising funds to upgrade the high school's disability access. Younger children threw snowballs and squealed in shock and delight whenever they got tagged. Their parents and other adults milled around in groups, greeting each other and chattering animately in advance of the actual lighting of the tree. Megan waved at people she knew, from her postal carrier to the man who bagged her groceries, to friends she'd known since preschool, everyone gathering together to celebrate the season. Charles took it all in with a curious expression, like someone visiting a strange and distant kingdom. The ornaments were all made by local children. She pointed to some of the creations of yarn and construction paper. "There's a contest to see who can design the best tree topper." "And I won," Sophia said as she skipped up to them. She wore a hat with a large pom-pom, no doubt knitted by her doting grandmother. "But not because my mom is the tree lighting ceremony director." "Certainly not," Charles said. He looked up at the pretty star Sophia had constructed of twigs and glittery pipe cleaners. "It's capital." The little girl beamed and her parents approached. "Nice work today, man," Dan said. He gave Charles' shoulder an amicable punch. "The visitors couldn't stop talking about you." "It's a group effort," Charles replied with a decisive nod. "Charles," Dan said, extending a hand, "this is my wife, Lydia." "Charmed," Charles said with a gentlemanly bow. Megan fought to keep from sighing. There was something so gallant about Charles's manners that spoke directly to her inner romantic. "I've heard so much about you," Lydia said. Her lovely dark brown skin was rosy from the cold, and her natural hair puffed out from beneath her hat. She and Megan hugged. "So this is your doing?" Charles asked as he gazed at the tree. "I had some help from volunteers," Lydia said, "including a few from my own family." She tapped a finger on giggling Sophia's nose. "But yes, I'm the madwoman responsible for all this." Megan tensed. Hopefully Charles wouldn't say anything too cutting or dismissive about holiday decorations being silly. "It's truly marvelous," Charles said, his voice sounding sincere. Megan silently exhaled while Lydia smiled shyly. "We take our Christmas pretty seriously around here," Dan said, and wrapped an arm around Lydia's shoulders. Just then, a couple approached and began talking to Lydia and Dan, thanking both of them for their contributions to the town's festivities. "Mr. Whitley," Sophia said, once her parents were distracted, "I've been looking and can't find anything yet to help you." She glanced around. "You know what? But I'll keep searching. I promise." The little girl's forehead wrinkled. Clearly, she took her assignment seriously. "You have my gratitude, Miss Sophia," Charles said. She nodded solemnly before going to her parents and taking their hands. "Let's take pictures of my star," she said with the bossiness of a child. Her parents nodded and ambled off, leaving Megan alone with Charles. "So," She asked, "What do you think?" She spread her arms wide to indicate the townspeople in their coats and scarves, the carolers, the steaming cups of hot cocoa. People posed for photos in front of the tree and playfully kissed beneath a sprig of mistletoe that was tied to a lamppost. The energy was lively, abundant with Christmas cheer, but maybe Charles thought it all rather silly. "Those Christmas parties I threw every year for my employees," he said. "I told you how I never went. I knew the holiday mattered to them, but it didn't matter to me. I thought, I don't like Christmas, and left it at that. That's too bad. Yet I wonder if it actually kept me from getting close with anyone," he said softly, as though the idea was only then occurring to him. "It's one thing to interact with people at our places of employment, but socializing outside of the workplace was all but unknown to me, and I put up that same barrier between Eliza and me." "But she was your fiancée," Megan said, puzzled. "You were close with her, right?" "Not truly." Sadness weighted his words. "I kept her at a distance, which was entirely my doing." "I'm so sorry," Megan said, aching for Charles and Eliza. How lonesome both of them must have been. She'd been lonely in her relationship with Brandon. Even when they were together in the same place, he hadn't really been with her, not fully. Something else usually occupied his attention. He was always either looking at his phone, watching television, or else his gaze had been constantly in motion, as if looking for someone more interesting than her. "But it's going to change." Charles gave a decisive nod. "Things will be different when I go back to my time." Megan only offered him an encouraging smile. Her excitement for the night's activities dimmed. However, to hear him talk about returning to his era. In a short time, he'd become her friend, and now she had begun to want more than just a friendship. There was no point in developing feelings for Charles, not when he was so determined to return to 1902 and Eliza. But Megan's foolish heart wasn't listening to her. She was headed straight for heartbreak despite all her logical reasoning. At some point, he was going to leave, on top of which he was far too much of a gentleman to turn his attention to anyone other than his fiancée. Megan wouldn't stand in the way of that. Behind her, the mayor started to give a short speech, but Megan wasn't listening. "Want to take a selfie?" she asked suddenly. If or when he did return to 1902, she wanted something to remember him by. "A whatie?" He looked baffled. "It's a self-portrait. Here." She pulled out her phone and stood close to him. It was hard to stay focused with him so near, smelling of cool December air and pine. But she told herself, "We're just friends." She held out her arm. "Okay, on the count of 3, say Christmas." He frowned for a moment, then edged even closer to her. His skin had a nice scent, too. "Oh boy, help." 1, 2, 3, Christmas! "Christmas," Charles said brightly. The tree lights burst to life behind them just as the flash on her phone went off. Everyone applauded and said ooh and ah. It was a spectacular sight, blazing with hundreds of colorful lights. The carolers launched into a chorus of "Oh Christmas Tree," and the crowd joined in. Not everybody had the best singing voices, but what was lacking in ability was made up for in enthusiasm. For Megan's own preservation, she put a little space between her and Charles before looking down at the screen to see how the picture turned out. But Charles stood close beside her as he, too, checked out the photo. In the picture, she and Charles had their heads close together, and they both wore big smiles. The tree made for an enchanting backdrop, filling the space behind them with light and color. "We look pretty darned adorable," she said, trying to focus on the photo. "I cannot believe that your telephone also serves as a camera. But yes, we do look pretty darned adorable, if I may say so." "You may." She might even turn into her phone's wallpaper. "Megan, honey." She turned, then whooped with happiness as she saw a quartet of very dear, very familiar faces approaching. "You know those people?" Charles asked in a whisper. "I should hope so." She waved her arm over her head. "They're my family." Chapter 9. Charles walked warily behind Megan as she eagerly hurried to her family. Families were tricky things. He'd lost his, and though Eliza had tried to bring him into hers, he could never quite feel at home with them. For one thing, though, his parents had been hard-working people, with his father employed as a pharmacist and his mother assisting behind the counter. They never had much money. Eliza's parents were part of New York's elite, the 400. They had been kind to Charles, never snobbish, but he couldn't feel comfortable with them. Or perhaps he didn't let himself feel comfortable with them. He often left their dinners early in order to attend to business and routinely but politely declined their offers to have him stay with them at their summer home in the Hamptons. He'd also planned to turn down Eliza's invitation to have him celebrate Christmas with her family. Perhaps he ought to make excuses to Megan and return home. He could find a ride, somehow, and keep himself from meeting the Turners. After all, he wasn't intending to stay in the 21st century. Why take the time to get to know them? "Charles," Megan said, turning to him and beckoning him forward with a smile, "I want you to meet them. I promise they won't make you sing Christmas carols," she added and laughed. "Not today, anyway." He found himself hurrying to catch up with her, 4 eager faces looking at him with open curiosity. "I'm so glad we ran into you," Megan said, beaming at her family. They were all dressed in festive sweaters and thick woolen coats. "There's someone I want you guys to meet. Charles, this is my mom, Sharon, and my dad, Greg." She gestured to a handsome woman with dark curly hair that was very like Megan's, and to a man with graying hair and spectacles who had trimmed his wheelchair with tinsel garlands. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner," Charles said, shaking their hands. "Please call us Greg and Sharon," Megan's mother said at once. "This handsome guy is my brother Nathan." Megan continued, nodding at a very fit-looking man who bore a particular resemblance to her. "And this beautiful lady with him is his wife, Elena." Charles shook hands with Megan's brother and sister-in-law. "A pleasure." "Megan, honey," Greg said, "who's your friend?" Though Megan's cheeks were pink from the cold, they turned even brighter pink. "Right. This is the mansion's new reenactor for Charles Whitley." "I'm Charles," he said. "That's funny," Nathan said, "having the same name as the guy you play." "It is, rather." For the time he had remaining in this era, Charles had to tread carefully. Having a handful of people know about his time traveling was all right. But if more people knew, they might start asking questions and putting both him and Megan in some uncomfortable situations. There was always the possibility that they'd deem him mad and lock him away in an asylum. Things could snowball easily. "Is this your first tree lighting in Cutter Springs?" Elena asked. "Yes, and it's quite the spectacle." Much as he disliked admitting to it, there was something delightful about joining together with the community to welcome in the holiday. The tree lighting gave him a sense of belonging and warmth. "My family's from South Texas," Elena said cheerfully, "so it took me a while to get used to the whole Christmas with snow thing." "I'm navigating the holiday myself," Charles answered. "Charles," Sharon said, turning to him, "what are you doing tomorrow night?" "Most likely watching the television," he admitted. "Not anymore," Megan's mother said. "You're coming to our family's Christmas party." "Yeah," Nathan said with enthusiasm. "You should come. It's tradition." "Oh, well, that's very..." He shifted uncomfortably. "Run!" part of him shouted. "Stay!" another cried. "I could learn about holiday family traditions." It was safer to go through life without forming bonds with people, avoiding hurt in case they disappeared or were lost. Everyone could be put in neat boxes, no one touching them. He'd never have to face the pain he had experienced when his parents had died. Stifling a sense of anxiety, he glanced at Megan. She sidled close to him. "This is exactly what you need," she whispered. "Family and the Christmas spirit." "I'm not certain it's a good idea. Dan, Lydia, and Sophia are going to be there. You'll be among friends." He exhaled, still uncertain, looking at Megan's sparkling eyes and seeing her encouraging smile. However, something within him unknotted. He'd be leaving soon. No need to concern himself with forming attachments. And she'd be there. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come to the party." Her smile melted the last vestiges of his unease. "Before we go to the party, are you up for a little theater? Amber can hold some seats for us at the Christmas one-act show, and after, we'll go to my parents." A holiday theatrical performance and a Christmas party? Did he dare immerse himself so deeply in the spirit of the season? "That sounds delightful," he said. "That's great. I'll pick you up at 6 and just have a light snack. Nobody leaves a Turner Christmas party with an empty stomach." "I'm looking forward to it," he said, and surprised himself with the genuine enthusiasm in his voice. It was becoming clear that if Megan asked him to do something, he was all too eager to agree. It was silly to spend so long getting ready for the theater and her family's Christmas party. At the theater, she'd be in the dark, and for the party, Megan knew everyone there. She'd known most of them for years. It wasn't like she had to get super spiffy. And yet, here she was, staring into her closet for a solid 30 minutes, debating what she wanted to wear. The velvet dress, too fancy. The t-shirt that read, I just want to decorate Christmas trees and eat peppermint bark, not fancy enough. Finally, she settled on a dark floral top and some winter white jeans, which she paired with ankle boots and the pearl earrings her parents had given her when she'd gotten her PhD. Megan eyed her laptop, reflected behind her in the mirror. She really ought to email Professor Coyle and ask about her letter of recommendation. The teaching job wasn't going to show up at her door, but every time she sat down and opened a blank email page, she gave up and surfed interesting American history websites instead. Ugh, she said aloud. Either do it or don't, but stop torturing yourself. Yet she didn't go to her computer and she didn't put it from her mind. It stuck there like a lump of unmelted cocoa in the bottom of her mug. At least thinking about the letter of recommendation briefly took her mind off fretting about her appearance tonight. She spent extra time doing her makeup, though, making sure it didn't look too heavy or not heavy enough. The last time she'd taken so much care with her cosmetics, she'd been prepping for the prom. Why am I doing this? It had nothing to do with Charles being her friend date tonight. Nothing at all. Keep telling yourself that. After the hurtful breakup with Brandon, she wasn't eager to get back into the dating world, though the internet opened up a world of possibilities for meeting people with similar interests. Folks who geeked out about 19th and 20th century American history weren't all that common. It wasn't as though putting tour guide, living history reenactor, and wannabe history professor on an online dating profile would net her tons of hits from interesting guys. It was all theoretical anyway. She didn't have the guts to get the letter from Professor Coyle, and she certainly didn't want to face the lack of interest from men on a dating app. Alone at Christmas. Again. With a groan of frustration, she wheeled away from the mirror and grabbed her coat, hat, and scarf. Moments later, she was out the door heading to the mansion. Her heart gave a ridiculous leap when she saw Charles waiting for her outside. Though his clothes were borrowed from Nathan, Charles looked exceptionally handsome, as though everything had been purchased just for him. His midnight blue V-neck sweater was nicely complemented by his own brown corduroy pants, and his hunter green scarf was tied around his neck with a dash of panache. As he climbed into the car and fastened his seatbelt, she said, "You look very nice. And you look quite pretty," he said, and then went red. "I mean, what you're wearing is exceptionally attractive. That is, you always look attractive, but..." "That's okay," she said, patting his hand and feeling charmed by both his compliments and his discombobulation. "I know what you mean. Ready to get a little culture and then stuff yourself with Christmas cookies? I await the artistic spectacle." He patted his flat stomach, "And there's plenty of room in here for every variety of holiday treats." She chuckled and drove toward the theater. "You can pick a radio station. A world of music right at your fingertips," he said, fiddling with the Turner knob. He winced when a loud pop station came on with its jangy instrumentation and insistent vocals. Is this what passes for music nowadays? It sounds like the Calliope colliding with the Candy Factory. Megan laughed at the app description. "Fortunately, there are enough stations for everyone's taste. Maybe you'd like this." She pressed a button and classical music swirled in the interior of her car. "Very nice," he said with a nod, "but don't forget, I'm still a man of the people. This sort of music makes me think of interminable dinner parties. Perhaps we can find some ragtime." "That's very modern, or it was not so common anymore," she said with an apologetic smile. "Want to keep looking?" He turned the knob, and when the Christmas station came on, his hand hovered but didn't change the station. She smiled to herself when he sat back, letting the holiday music fill the car. "So," he said, "tell me, Miss Megan Turner, how fares your quest for getting that letter of recommendation?" Wow, it was like he'd been in her head, which was kind of weird, but also kind of nice. "It's so busy at work in the holiday, and..." She stopped. Even she couldn't quite believe her excuses. "May I remind you," he said, "that Rosie, my housekeeper, got whatever she wanted. A force of nature, that Rosie." "It sounds like it."